Hello and welcome to the coronavirus update for the 20th of May 2020. And today I'm going to be looking at two things. The first of all is Donald Trump saying that it is now a badge of honor that America has the most cases of coronavirus in the world. Yes, yesterday I looked at the Fox News feed. Today we're going to be looking at something from MSNBC. But before we get to that, I want to briefly take a look everywhere in the world. We're almost up to 5 million cases. We'll be there in a couple of days. Total deaths is, kind of following suit. This is probably going to max out. I'm going to guess it's 2 million, probably. 1 to 2 million is where this is going to end up eventually. This is going to go on for some time. Anyway, before we get on to there, I want to briefly take a look at some places around the world. Someone has said that we should look at Greece as an exemplar of how to handle the coronavirus. And yeah, they seem to be doing okay. I think Greece is, about 10 million people or something? And yeah, Greece is doing okay. Right, so first of all, let's take a look at what Donald Trump has to say about having the coronavirus in America.
We have a lot of cases. I don't look at that as a bad thing. I look at that as, in a certain respect, as being a good thing because it means our testing is much better.
No. If you wanted to detecting cases, yeah, that would be good. But really, in that case, what you're most interested in is the ratio of the number of dead people to the number of people who have confirmed cases. That tells you how good your testing is.
So if we were testing 1 million people instead of 14 million people, we would have far fewer cases.
No, you would have exactly the same number of cases. It's just you wouldn't know about them. But in any event, what was he saying? If they'd only done 1 million tests, would be about 3 parts in 1,000, of testing of the US population. He's got 40 million. He's very proud about 14 million tests for America. So I'm going to make that easy and call it 15 million tests because there are about 300 million Americans, which is, what is that? Divided by 3, 5%. 5% of the population has been tested in America. And those are total tests. Some of those will be repeats and the such like. So, yeah, but whatever. You'll have about a 1 in 20 chance if you're in America that you've had a test for the coronavirus.
Right? So I view it as a badge of honor. Really, it's a badge of honor. It's a great tribute to the testing and all of the work that a lot of professionals have done.
No. So let's take a look at those statistics in more detail. So what you're really interested in is detecting the cases is good, but if you detect all of the cases and the coronavirus has a fixed mortality to it, then your ratio of deaths to confirmed cases should be super low. So let's first of all take a look at roughly what that is for the world. And at the world, we're at about 5 million cases. Right, so if you double this, you get up to, right, just look at that number there. It's about 50. You double it, you get up to 100, which means you double this number here, and that's roughly your percent. So it's about 6.5% is the world average in terms of the number of people who are confirmed to have it, who end up dying, is about 6%. Let's take a look at what it is for America. So America has 1.5 million cases and just under 100,000 dead. So to reduce this, to reduce 150 to 100, you got to reduce it by 1/3. It's about 100. You reduce it by 1/3, you're going to get down to about 6%-ish. So America is pretty much par for the course in terms of its ratio of deaths to confirmed cases. There is nothing spectacular about America at all. There is no badge of honor to be had in being average. So let's take a look at number 2 on the list, which is Russia. Now, in Russia, you can instantly see it's 1%. You divide 300 by 3, you get to 100. And you divide 3 by 3, you get down to 1%. Don't believe that for a second. So again, there is some plasticity in how credibly you take these numbers. This would be the lowest by a long way. In fact, I think the next lowest was Germany. Germany was historically low, but you kind of believe it because they went absolutely ballistic with the testing. And this is getting on for 200. So divide 200 by 2. Divide this by about 2. You get down to about 4%. So Germany is well below average in terms of the number of dead to the number of confirmed cases. And yeah, Brazil is turning into a nightmare. But by the way, Spain is probably one of the worst, I think. If you actually take a look at, they're up at almost 15% here, which is a lot higher than the global average. But in many ways, for them to ramp up testing now doesn't do them any good because the time when they needed the testing was back here somewhere, right? So they can test all they want. They're never going to get this number down again. But they're at about 15%. UK is pretty bad as well. What's UK at? Divide by 3-ish. It's over 10%, whatever it is. And now, one of the things that people always used to take, when I was saying that, China numbers look kind of credible. There's China. All the way down there. Trace. China is below Peru now. Back in the day when I was sort of saying that, China's numbers look kind of credible. What are they at? This is, you bump this up by 20%. They're at about 5%, which is somewhat below global average, but not crazily so. So, but people always used to say, you probably believe that North Korea has 0 confirmed cases. The basis being that, North Korea lie about everything. But if you think about it, it's actually fairly credible that North Korea doesn't have any cases, in that the country is permanently in quarantine. No one is allowed in and out of North Korea. So if no one's allowed in and out of North Korea, how would the coronavirus get in there in the first place? So it's one of those bizarre things that, I don't really believe anything that North Korea says, but it wouldn't actually surprise me if North Korea did have 0 cases. And South Korea, of course, they're not South Africa, South Sudan. Okay, let's try Korea. There we go. So if we go for South Korea, they're at about 2%. So they're a long way down. I mean, it's just when you compare the bulk numbers. If you compare the deaths per capita, I want to do that. I'll do that in another video. In deaths per capita, I think they've got like 50 million people. So it's 1/6 of the population of America. So if you scale this up by about 6, you're going to get just over 1,000. Whereas America is... So if South Korea was scaled up to American size, you'd have about 1,000 people dying, whereas America has 100,000 dying. And it's just depressing when you see all of this red here. Right, which brings us on to the second thing which I wanted to talk about. Actually, before I do that, let me briefly touch on my amazing model for when America gets back to the state of emergency number of new cases per day. So I made my prediction based on just this blue data. And I mean, it's like 50% amused me, 50% annoyed me. No end. That people were telling me about how terrible a scientist I was for putting a straight line on this. And, right, so this is the thing. A good scientist is someone who sees the pattern and starts to understand how things work before it becomes bloody obvious that that's how it works. And the purple line that I stuck on here was essentially based on two things. I don't think that's a best fit line. I think that's just just my estimate. It was based on two things. That Italy seemed like it was behaving. America looked like it was behaving kind of like Italy. And if you took a look at how Italy's cases went, this was back when you're about here somewhere. It looked kind of straight liney. And the reason for this is probably that Italy had a very large outbreak in the north and a secondary outbreak somewhere else. So what you actually have is the most of it is the early curve is the outbreak in the north, which then settles down fairly quickly. And then you have a second curve that comes up later, which is the rest of the country. And this is probably fairly similar for America. This is why it looks kind of samey for America, is most of the early outbreak is New York. New York is actually going down like crazy at the moment. But the rest of the country is sort of cooking up for a much larger and longer-tailed version. And you add the two together and you get this. Doesn't really matter. It looks like this is a fairly decent prediction now. We're at about day 50. You've got to go to day 110-ish. So significantly over a month, almost 2 months still left on that. Which brings me on to the guy I know in America, a very good friend of mine, fairly at risk category, getting fairly old, and a good personal friend. And he got the coronavirus, and it's one of those things you kind of know the end of the story because he's alive when he was talking to me. So, and he had just today been certified as being clear, which is fantastic. But descriptions of someone who actually had the coronavirus. Number one, no cakewalk. Body, the perception of body temperature was all screwed up, so he felt very cold all of the time, and he got to the point with the breathing where he was making the calls to go to hospital because he was coughing so badly. He was coughing so badly, it made it really difficult to breathe. But that, it turned out, was the virus at its worst. And, he didn't obviously know it at the time. But after that, it got better. And it wasn't just him, it was basically his entire family that got it. And the other thing that he said that was, the symptoms are all over the place. They're different for different people. So different members of his family, different symptoms. Some people were just laid out, they had no energy. And the other symptom that he described was loss of all of the senses of taste, which made all of a sudden eating cheese is like eating an eraser or a rubber. If you're in the UK, they're called rubbers. In America, that kind of means something different. But yeah, it was like eating an eraser. It was just like chewing something that had basically no taste to it and the texture of, something like that. And then the really weird thing is the senses of taste recovered at different rates. So sweet was the first taste to come back, if it ever went away entirely. But it leads to these super weird things where he used to like drinking tea with sugar in the morning. And so he would make his tea with sugar, and it just tasted like sugar and water. There was no taste of tea there whatsoever. And yeah, so the first one to come back was sugar, then salt. He couldn't taste salt for a while. And it was the umami was the last one to return. But yeah, and he also described the antibody tests, which, whilst they were in principle the better antibody tests, not everyone who had the virus, they were tested for the antibodies soon afterwards, and some people, they tested negative for the antibodies. So even though they were meant to be the better antibody tests, the bad antibody tests are almost pointless in having. You just almost flip a coin and it'll tell you whether you have the antibodies or not. But yeah, they tested, some of them were testing negative for antibodies straight after having the virus, which doesn't seem right. So, and yeah, so I got two friends in America, both of them fairly old or older now. And yeah, if you just look at it straight by the numbers, America doesn't handle it any better or any worse than anyone else in the world. Probably significantly worse than Europe. I'll look in terms of death per capita another day. But again, death per capita kind of varies on how people count their deaths. So probably the best way of doing it is you take a look at how many people died last year, how many people died this year. The difference is coronavirus related. So for in England, I think they only count coronavirus deaths if you're basically diagnosed with coronavirus in a hospital and die with coronavirus, which means that the numbers are probably undercooked by 50%, which is not that. The only two I know are UK and Italy. Both are probably similarly undercooked. But even if the numbers have a 50% error on them, it still gives you a feel for, your deaths per capita in the 1 in 1,000, 1 in 10,000, 1 in 100. What range are they in? Okay, so that's, I think, all that I wanted to cover in today's update. If you found that useful, thumbs up would be awesome. And many thanks for watching, and see you next time.